Paul Roos here from Performance by Design, and welcome to the Culture Couch. Today I've got Emil Studham and we're going to talk to our business partner Gerard Murphy. Now, before I bring you in, Emil, Murph, I don't even know whether we've asked you this question, but you've been in leadership and culture and performance now for 20 to 30 years, but prior to that, how did you actually get into it, and what was your background? I think you were teaching at Aquinas at one stage.
Yeah, I started off as a teacher, really, back in the late 80s. I went to Ballarat CAE, as it was called then, and then ended up teaching at Aquinas College in Ringwood. So taught there for about 8 years, I think. I was a sports coordinator and phys ed coordinator there, and then ended up doing a postgraduate degree in sports administration at Deakin University in Burwood. So I spent 2 years there, and then was offered a job at Melbourne Football Club. So I basically used to support all the members that you, I was going to say, that you tore the heart out of when you spoke about that, the shadow of defeat. What was it? What was that? The shadow of, what was the cloak of defeat? What was your quote there?
The veil of negativity.
The veil of negativity. That's right. I remember that. It's one of the things I remember from your time at Melbourne. So yes, I was at Melbourne Football Club as membership, and it was a really interesting time. That was with Cameron Schwab and Hassaman prior to that. Joseph Gutnick was the president. I was the membership manager during the supposed Hawthorn Melbourne merger. I actually designed the new Melbourne Hawks membership card.
Right.
And then ended up as the PR media manager with Schwabby before I left to become a consultant. Yeah.
So most people that would know you would know if your time at Geelong. So we'll get into that reasonably quickly. But how did you get into that leadership space?
When I was at Melbourne Football Club, we set up a program helping young people in the community. So we're training athletes as role models to visit schools, prisons, Indigenous communities. And the program was really successful, and we partnered up with a charity at the time. When I resigned from Melbourne Football Club, the guy who was heading up the charity approached me and asked me if I would be interested in expanding it to all of the clubs. So at that time, I thought, why not? So I wrote a business plan for the program, and then I went and visited the AFLPA, and we found a sponsor, and we got all of the clubs on board. And so as I was visiting the clubs to interview the coaches and the development managers and the players, etc., to get volunteers for the program, I came across a guy at Collingwood called Ray McLean, who I'd known for a while. And so Ray and I set up this program. Ray did the training, I ran it. And out of the program, it was really successful. It was a fantastic program. Out of that, the athletes came to us and said, hey, we'd love you to set up an organisation that basically trains us and develops us in life skills. And so out of that, we set up a company called Leading Teams.
Yeah, so obviously Ray worked with me at Sydney, and that's how you and I first met. Take us now inside, then I'll bring Emil into the conversation as well. But as I said, probably the most famous workplace you've had, and we'll go over a lot of the corporate stuff because the bulk of your work's been corporate, but probably the most famous is the Geelong Football Club. So take us inside that when you first walked into that organisation.
Yeah, there's some pretty funny stories at Geelong. So pretty much I was the CEO, so I set up Leading Teams. Ray was the trainer. Another guy came in a little bit later as a partner. And I was pretty much running the business. And because I lived in Torquay, Geelong were looking for a facilitator. So I said, well, it's crazy for you guys to do it. Let me do it. So basically I became the Geelong facilitator. And I remember the first meeting where Neil Baum, Ronnie Watt and Mark Thompson, the coach, sat down, and Barmy said, Mark, I'd like to introduce you to Gerard Murphy. He's the guy I'd like to run the leadership program. I'll hand it over to you now, Murph. And it was a really uncomfortable conversation because Bomber Thompson did not want me in the room. He was happy with how things were going, and the last thing he needed was to have me there. So after about half an hour, we sort of worked through the fact that I might be able to help him, and the rest was history. So we kicked it off the next week, and the guys at Geelong they were just screaming out for some structure, for some process around their leadership, and they really took to it. So Tommy Harley, who I guess we all know is now the CEO at Sydney Swans, he was just a fantastic guy, fantastic leader. He took the work on really quickly. Cameron Ling, who was his vice captain at that time, he drove the program really hard. So between Tom and Cameron, you had a really powerful duo who were driving the program and driving the standards. And then on top of that, you had the other leaders were also bought in and were also good people and good players. And then outside the leadership group, you had Matthew Scarlett, who was very influential. And Scarlett and I became good mates. And so he was another one that had a huge impact on how the values, culture were driven through the organisation.
Yeah, and I want to take you to a couple of specific incidents, meetings, I guess, and they're already public because I know we're all very careful about nothing getting out of the organisation we work with. So, I mean, I know you've spoken about them before because they've become public through whether Lingy or Tom Harley or young Gary Ablett Jr. or whatever. Take us through a couple of the real turning points in that footy club. Because I know at Sydney we beat them in 2005 they were about 4 goals up. So it was a pretty daunting time, wasn't it, for the club? They were sort of on the cusp and then they fell over a bit, but they always had the talent there. Take us an insight into some of those meetings that, again, have already become public, but through your eyes.
Yeah, they had a really bad year in 2006, and that was, I guess that precipitated me getting involved. Probably the critical time, I think, was we ran 1 or 2 sessions prior to Christmas. We did Tom Harley for feedback from the group, and that was pretty straightforward because Tom was such a professional person. And I said to the guys, who wants to go next? And Cam Mooney's always a bit of a joker. So Moon said something like, I nominate Matty Scarlett. And I said, all right, well, thanks, Moons, given that you're so proactive in offering other people, why don't you do it? So Moons had his feedback, and it was really interesting because what they found was that they were giving him feedback as humour. And so he'd been getting suspended, and they'd been saying to him, oh, you're good on your Moons, tough guy, blah, blah, blah. And so he thought that was okay. And when they got really honest with him and said, mate, every time you get suspended, it hurts us, it changed the way they started to talk to each other. So that was before Christmas. Just before, as they were leaving to go to Christmas, to make sure everyone does the right thing, blah, blah, blah. And again, history tells us that Steve Johnson had an incident over the Christmas period, and it was sort of the turning point, I think, for the club, because I remember the phone call. I remember where I was standing when I made the phone call. I rang Neil Barham. I said, Neil, do you mind if the leaders handle this? And at that point, Neil could have said yes, or he could have said no. If he had said no, we were sort of going to be pushing it uphill from there, I felt.
Yeah.
He said, yeah, of course, I'd love them to. And I'm sure Mark will support you. So when we called a meeting as soon as the guys got back from the Christmas break, and I remember Tommy Harley was staying with his girlfriend in New South Wales country, so he rang in. And so we brought Steve in, I had a chat with him, and then he left the room. We had a really good conversation, and Steve came back in, and the guys decided to suspend him for, I think it was 12 weeks, all the pre-season and 6 weeks into the season. But the best thing about the guys at Geelong was it wasn't a suspension like, off you go, go away, good luck, I hope it's okay. It was actually, you can't train with us, you have to go and get a job, but we are going to do everything we can to support you on the way through. And so we put in place all this support for him. And then ultimately Steve came back, and a lot of people didn't think he would. They all doubted him. But through the support that the guys gave him, he came back, and again, the rest is history. You know, he won the Norm Smith Medal that year in a premiership team. So that was sort of two critical turning points, I think. And then I guess the way the guys supported each other. So having the conversation is the easy part, but then giving someone a plan and then supporting them through it, that's the key. You know, it's easy to give feedback, but if you don't help people and support them through the process, then you might as well not waste your time in the beginning.
And I think that's the missing piece, Murph, isn't it? That the media don't report that part of it, because probably through the process of Sydney and then Geelong and then obviously Hawthorn, it becoming more high profile about leaders disciplining their peers. What's been missed in this whole process is the support mechanism. So it's not just a case of, well, you do this, we're suspending you or doing this. And it was the same at Sydney. That does get missed, isn't it? It's not necessarily, the feedback is fantastic, but it's always about the care and how we make that person improve and get better, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I had a meeting, I got up with Tommy Harley not long ago, and we were just chatting about Gary Ablett's feedback, because, you know, it's well reported, so we won't go into it. But Hales talks about the fact that the thing he remembers in the room that day was the care for Gary.
Yeah.
So it wasn't feedback for, you know, to even up with Gaz or to give him a hard time. It was genuine care. And the guys that supported him afterwards were perhaps some of the guys that he's not even that close to then or now, but they were prepared to do whatever they could to make him better. And it's interesting because I've been watching the Jordan video, and that it came out really strongly in that as well. Like, Jordan realised pretty quickly, hey, I'm not going to win the title without my teammates. And so he started to demonstrate genuine care. And so I think you're right. It's easy for the media to report the headline, but they miss that, all the work that goes in underneath it. And it was the team at Geelong and other good teams that you work with, as you know, they were really honest with each other, but everyone knew that it was coming from a place of care. And so therefore no one ever took it personally, because they knew that whatever anyone said to another person was on the basis of making them better so we could be better. And it was a really great place to be.
And one of the things I talk about, and I'm going to bring you, Emil, on this, is culture travels. And it's interesting, Emil, that you reached out to Gerard Murphy, having never met Gerard Murphy before and never been inside the Geelong Football Club. But through the eyes of someone that was in another country, what did you see of Geelong's culture that allowed you to reach out to Gerard Murphy?
Yeah, it was, well, there was two things. One, you're exactly right. The media portrayed these honest conversations, and that's about it. You know, Matthew Scarlett became this and Gary Ablett became that because they told him, and, you know, they told him to him straight. And I'm like, okay, well, that's fantastic. For me, that's what I needed. I know that I needed it, and I was not delivering it myself. So first and foremost, I wanted to learn how to have an honest, real talk conversation, and that's how it was portrayed in the media. Second to that, though, the pure success of Geelong going from, as you say, Bruzy, thereabouts to then having, so when Jez and I met, it was 2-11, so they'd actually just won their third flag in the 5 years. And I thought, well, there's something going right here. And Gerard and I had a mutual friend, plus he married a school teacher of mine from Monthaggy. So my connection to Gerard was actually pretty easy to get to, knowing that he specialised in honest conversations, and the results of Geelong were so profound. Why wouldn't you reach out to someone with that type of success specific to my personal issues that I was facing at my own company?
And we're going to move backwards and forwards a little bit, guys, between the corporate world and the sporting world, because they're interlinked. But Murph, then take us through your journey then, because you sort of disappeared from the shores of Australia and headed over to to England and work again with a lot of sporting organisations, but a lot of corporates as well. So how was that journey?
Yeah, before I move on from Geelong, Rizzy, I think the other thing which is often overlooked when we look at successes of teams, is that it wasn't just there was great leaders at every critical juncture in the organisation.
Yeah, good point.
So you had Frank Costa as president.
Yeah.
You had Brian Cook as the CEO. You had Neil Balme as football manager. You had Stephen Hocking, who was Neil Balme's football operations manager. You had Tom Harley. You had Cameron Ling. So you had Mark Thompson, who was a fantastic coach. So you had these really, really great leaders at these really key points in the organisation, so that communication and messaging was really consistent and flowed right through the organisation. So, at the beginning of 2009, we decided to head over to the UK to look at football or soccer and see if the model would work in soccer. Took me about 3 weeks to realise that it wouldn't, but I had a great time in the UK anyway. So I pretty much worked in sport for 4 years. Worked in championship football with Bristol City, Doncaster Rovers, and Crystal Palace, and then I went to West Ham United in the Premier League. So it was fantastic to work in soccer, because particularly at that level, because you got to see a lot of the things we talk about not being practiced, and on that basis it reinforced what you should or shouldn't do. And it's amazing how in organisations that spend that much money on talent, they just don't invest in the culture or value side of the business, and particularly around the behaviour. So you end up with, no one understands where the power sits. So has the owner got the power? Has the manager got the power? Have the players got the power? And when you sack people regularly, you destabilise that.
Yeah.
And as soon as you destabilise the leadership in an organisation, it sort of, hang on tight and let's see where this goes, because no one really can be sure what's rewarded or what's not. So that was great. And then I also was lucky enough to work with the England rugby union team, the national team. And so we travelled around Europe in the Six Nations tournament. We won that for the first time in a number of years. I worked for the Olympic team, the GB Olympic team. Did lots of teamwork in terms of rugby, so rugby league and rugby union. And so we had 4 amazing years where we basically travelled around Europe, basically watching sport and having a really good time. And the things, it was invaluable to look at different coaching styles. The women's water polo team for the Great Britain Olympic team was coached by a Hungarian guy who was the hardest bastard I've ever met in my life. Like, he just tortured the girls, just absolutely tortured them. And so helping that group of girls manage the workload and the lack of communication they were given and get through to the Olympics and perform pretty well, was like, every team and every group presents a different set of circumstances, and that's always been the challenge of our work, I guess, is finding your way through with different coaches, different leaders in the team.
Oh, and let's switch gears a little bit now to the corporate world. So when you entered that sort of realm, what were the biggest differences you saw from the sport to the corporate world? And then we'll touch on how both have evolved over the years. But what were the biggest differences when you first sort of walked into your first corporate business?
Well, I think the biggest difference is that the sport has got the premiership or the trophy at the end of it, and so you've got a defined season. Simon Sinek's written a book recently about the fact that the corporate teams just go on, and so finding that sort of measure of performance, if you like, that sporting teams have on a week-to-week basis every time they run out is a difficult thing. That said, the leadership characteristics, the principles that we apply in sport are just as relevant. Sport, because of its week-to-week challenges and the focus on the premiership, they drive relentlessly towards high performance. They will do whatever they can to be the best they can be on the basis that the media scrutinise them week in, week out. And so often we would start with the corporate team and say, if the media were reporting on this meeting today, would your behaviour change?
Yeah.
The answer is always yes. And so I think that drive for performance that comes from media scrutiny day in, day out on performance, it makes a difference. And I think getting that mindset to corporate teams can be challenging. But having said that, great leaders are still great leaders. So, great leaders are good role models. They listen to their people. They make them feel safe. They are happy to get feedback. They respond to that feedback. They create systems and processes that allow flow of information and consistent flow of information. So the challenges are, I guess, bringing that urgency that you don't always get in the corporate sector, but you have in sport. Bringing that into the corporate world is probably the biggest challenge.
Yeah. And the biggest wins then, Murph. So from a corporate point of view, maybe the one where you walk in and you've said, gee, this is a complete and utter mess, without mentioning the names perhaps, but your sort of biggest wins and what that really looked like and how quick or slow that change took.
Change in the corporate world is no different than the sporting world. It is instantaneous if people decide to commit to the behaviours that they've agreed on. Like, the thing I love about our work is it's not rocket science. And so we continually say this. If you say we are going to behave like this and be this team, and everyone in the group does it, you can't but become that team.
Yeah.
And so we can bullshit all we like and, say that we're going to do this, but if we don't do it, it won't happen. And then it's great to sit back and listen to excuses. So, one of our clients, one of our current clients, we still talk about the first meeting we had where they all sat around the table and basically made jokes and hung shit on each other and was snide and used humour inappropriately. And eventually, after about half an hour, I just said, hang on, stop. I think we need to take the humour out. And they did. And it changed the business. Yep. It changed the business. And they still reflect back on that, it's probably 7 or 8 years later. I mean, I know you and I did a session with an executive team not so long ago, Ruzi, and it was a similar sort of thing. And straight away, the meetings changed and the behaviour of the group changed. And as soon as the people who you are leading start to see you change your behaviour as a leader, then they will adapt because you suddenly are starting to reward the right things and challenge inappropriate things.
It's funny, one of the questions we most get asked, isn't it? What companies do you work best with? It's not what companies, it's what leaders, isn't it? Because we talk about it all the time. The leaders are the role models. If they're not going to do it, then it becomes very difficult for you two guys to do it. Emil, bringing you in, describe Gerard Murphy through your office in terms of you've worked with him, you brought him over to Toronto, you had him as a mentor, you're now working day to day with him, and obviously you guys facilitate a lot of stuff together, a lot of stuff apart, but describe what you see in Gerard.
Yeah. Well, I'll go all the way back to 2011. There was definitely an element of, and again, from the media, there was an element of fear is not the word, but we were like, as a group of young Australians working in Toronto, Canada, we were all footy heads, a lot of us. We knew of his success with Geelong. We'd heard about these real talk exercises and sessions. So we were on edge of like, okay, this is going to get real today. And we're also excited for it. And then Jez has a very matter-of-fact approach, which and just sort of cool, calm, and just sticks to the job. which was awesome for us because as a leader, I was pretty erratic. So that helped model what it should look like when you stick to a process and just get the job done. So that was fantastic. And then being mentored by him, because he was living in England and I was living in Canada, a lot of it was done via phone. And then it was these 2-week stints of being in each other's life for 2 weeks, travelling around Toronto, running meetings, going, having chats, having dinners. And we just kept on talking about it. He just shared amazing stories and stories and stories, which helped my zone of learning, which was fantastic. But also the thing that was been so consistent with working with Jez is he always leans into that real talk conversation, and whether or not the feedback is 100% accurate or not, or the right thing, he will say it so that we can deal with it and move forward, which I think is a great attribute and really lives the work that we do. Because if you leave it untouched, you let that snowball turn into something bigger than it really should be. He's always saying, don't let the little things turn into big things. And that's a real testament to his character and living the PBD system, if you will.
And I think, Murph, too, I mean, having lived it and breathed it on both sides of the fence as a coach, I would always encourage people to have someone external running it, because you're just not as emotionally involved. I mean, we do get connected clearly to the companies we work with and the teams we work with. But Murph, how important is that? Because to Emil's point, you're able to deal with issues and you're less emotionally attached to that issue. You're saying, well, here's an issue. To your point before, this is the way we act, guys. This is not a complicated system. Why have you done it? How do we make you better? But more importantly, well done, well done, well done. How important is that not to have that absolute emotional attachment? Because I know when I was coaching in Sydney, I would get challenged by Ray as well. You know, I would get challenged by the players. It's very important in my view, but how does it look from your point of view?
100%. I think that's vital because not only, well, probably not. It's really important to have someone come in who isn't emotionally connected. But I think the other thing is when you're part of an environment or an organisation or a culture, you just become part of it. So you start to accept the behaviour the group's accepting. And if you stop and look at it and go, hey, this isn't right, sometimes it can make everyone really awkward. And the person that's making the observation, they can become alienated or made to look stupid because of calling out inappropriate behaviour. Whereas as an external person, you're not there all the time. You walk in and you go, hang on, what's going on here, guys? Why are we doing that? So calling out the elephant in the room, I was listening to, COVID-19, so podcasts. I was listening to Brené Brown do a podcast the other day, and she was talking about those awkward conversations. And really that's what you're doing. You're setting up a framework around how we're going to behave, and then you are encouraging people to have those conversations, mainly positive, but sometimes not so positive, around calling out the obvious. And so having someone external come in to say, hang on, why are we doing that? Can we talk about that? How are we going to deal with it? What are we going to do going forward? So it's not only making or encouraging people to talk about it, it's about how do we deal with it and how do we support people as we go forward.
And on that point, Jez, you talk about that other client with the humour and the banter. I actually came to the session 8 weeks later expecting to walk into a room that you would sort of describe that you and Ruzi had experienced the first session. And then when we gave them the really positive feedback and the recognition, it was interesting to see how they were like, oh, really? We didn't notice. Like that outside observer was just, and Ruzi, you and I had a session as well with another group. We did the same thing. We even brought up their data from day one, which was about 5 or 6 months. And they were like, wow, who's that group? Who's that? I couldn't understand or even connect to the fact that they used to be that, or they were even surprised that we were giving that recognition. So that outsider, it's just, and I know my journey, it was absolutely imperative. You don't know what you're doing a lot of the time until someone helps you all realise it at the same time together. Then everyone owns the power of the change, right?
Yeah, I was having a conversation with a CEO late last week, and we're on a Zoom call, and there was three of us, him and his two IC, and he just made a small comment which wasn't the right comment, and so I just said, "Oh, I'm not sure that's right. You know, can we talk about that?" But then afterwards, the CEO and I had a really good chat, and it was only a really small comment. But what he was doing, he was undermining all the good work that the rest of, by these simple throwaway lines. And he rang me back at the start of this week and said, "Hey, thanks so much for that, because no one else would tell me that." No one.
Yeah.
No, and it was so simple, but it was just a throwaway line, because language is everything.
Yeah.
If we don't get our language right, then it doesn't matter. People will just stop doing they'll become fearful. They'll stop doing the things that we want them to do, like contribute, speak up, all that. And they'll just keep their head down and off they go. And it's so important, particularly in times of stress like we've got now, where people are frightened about their job, they're not sure what's coming in the future. And if we don't create environments as leaders where they're going to speak openly, they're just going to put their head down and pray like shit that it isn't me. It's not going to be me. Like I hope it's the guy beside me, because I don't want to be the next out the door. And you can't stress enough how important creating a safe, connected environment is in the time of stress. I mean, it's important any time, but again, you know this, Rizzy, yourself. It always comes out when you don't want it to come out, and that's normally in the time of high stress.
And I think it's a great point, because when I started at Fitzroy, it was just tell. There was no such thing as a safe environment. It was a brutal environment. It wasn't safe at all. And I think what we're seeing in sport, and certainly in my business of football, is the environment's become incredibly safe. I mean, there's so many stories about Damien Hardwick at Richmond, and St Kilda just recently got their players to write letters to each other, and about the vulnerability piece. But perhaps to finish off, Murph, what's the change in the program you've seen over many, many years? How has it changed, and how has it evolved to create a much more safe environment, but also to cater for this new generation of people that are entering the workplace?
Yeah, I think society's changed, so we're all more aware of looking after each other and creating a safe environment. I think that it's really important to make the distinction, though, between a weak environment and a safe environment.
Yeah.
So when we talk about high-performing safe environments, they are pretty uncomfortable to be in at times, because people are having the conversations. But what they've done is they've all committed and they all trust each other, even though they might necessarily like each other. Where we get it wrong is if we think that everybody has to be happy, and it's just like look after each other and not deal with the issues, because then the issues just fester away and they appear at the wrong times. So I think the transition for me has been the community is much better educated. We've moved away from the old directive leader, where do as I say, not as I do. I'm going to tell you what to do, to a period now where young people expect to be able to ask questions, expect to know, and that's fantastic, because that's how it should be, and it makes us better leaders if we can create that environment. But it's not so easy, because I think Emil uses the term pendulum. Am I too hard? Am I too soft? Do I get it right? Do I reward enough? Do I challenge enough? Like it isn't easy to be a leader at all, and making sure you can sort of got someone to help you and advise you and report in and give you honest feedback. It all goes to making up what we call a role model leader or a good culture.
Yeah, and I think to finish off, Murph and to have the final say. I think one of your greatest strengths in having the pleasure of working really closely with you last week is getting on that pendulum, knowing when to really say, now hang on, let's address that. You touched on it before with that CEO, and not letting those moments slide, but also getting to the point where, guys, hang on, are we giving enough positive feedback now? Are we coming from a place of care? Where is that conversation? Where is that feedback coming from? So I think you do an incredible job of navigating a really difficult path between high performance, tough, this is what we do, to, hang on, guys, let's get out of our head and let's work out where it's coming from. Is this out of our heart because we want to get better as a group? If it is, let's continue the conversation. If it's not, let's shut it down right now, because there has been a dramatic change in the type of people that are coming in organisations, and both of you guys do a fantastic job. Murph, thanks for navigating us through your journey, some of which most people would know the Geelong days, but a lot of which, certainly the primary school teaching, the membership at Melbourne, and obviously a lot of the corporate work.
Secondary school teaching.
Secondary teacher. I knew you'd get on that one.
Secondary school teacher, not a primary school teacher.
Oh, sorry. Actually, my nephew went to Aquinas College and he did very well. So you must have left a very, very good legacy there too. They still talk about the great Gerard Murphy as well.
Did I teach him? I wonder. That'd be interesting.
Actually, I don't think so. Anyway, boys, thanks a lot. Thanks to Emil. Thanks to Murph.
Well done, Jez. Thanks, Ruzi.